Welcome, everybody. My name is Vanessa Venturini. I am an educator with University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension, and we are so pleased to bring you this Learn at Home webinar series from the College of the Environment and Life Sciences. And tonight we are going to learn about ticks, your backyard, and your health from Dr. Tom Mather. So if you want to go ahead and advance the slide, we'll get going. Cooperative Extension, as you may know, is the branch of the university that brings all of the good knowledge and research from the land-grant university system out to the communities so that we can improve people's lives and the environment. And here are all of our different focus areas for the various programs within Extension, and you're going to hear about TickEncounter tonight. And our guiding principles, like I said before, we really want to help people and the community, and we believe in social justice. And we're so glad that we're able to address everybody's needs by bringing the educational programs to you via webinar during this time of social distancing. A few notes of housekeeping. Thank you in advance. We are going to be sending you a brief survey after the webinar so that you can let us know if you've learned anything and if you plan on doing anything differently. So it's our way of evaluating how we're doing. And we do read all of those surveys, so thanks for taking the time on that. And we always get this question, so we'll address it up front. Yes, we are recording this webinar, and you will find it within a week or so up on the University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. And we always add closed captioning to those once they're uploaded. And there you can find all of the other previous webinar series as well. And so I am so pleased to introduce you to tonight's speaker. He is my colleague in University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension. He came to the university in '92 from the Harvard School of Public Health, and he is now the director of URI's Tick Center for Vector-Borne Disease and its TickEncounter Resource Center. His research focus is on tick ecology and tick bite and disease prevention. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mather.
I've never seen so many of them, or so bold. Oh, they take my place. I'm not going anywhere. We're gonna need a bigger net. Oh my God, they're all over me! Get them up, get them. Splash it with water. That's not gonna work. Let's burn them off her. That's not gonna work either. We need laser! Ticknado is coming, so be prepared.
Well, welcome to our webinar tonight. I'm wondering how many of you think that tick season is just about over? Maybe you could raise your hands. Look at all those hands going up. People out there, I can't see you really. Anyhow, it's a quiet time right now. In fact, the last few weeks of August and the first few weeks of September are probably, at least in the northeastern United States, the quietest time for ticks, and probably across the whole of the United States. But very soon, the adult stage black-legged ticks will be on their coming out and starting to reach their peak, which is in mid-October and November, believe it or not. And so it's almost always some tick season, and the fall is the adult black-legged tick season. So I'm wondering how many people can see the ticks in this picture. You gotta look pretty hard. There they are, right about here, right next to the side of the road. Those are female black-legged ticks. And in that little stretch of about 10 yards, we collected about 45. And it led me to have this little light bulb moment, which was there's more ticks in more places than I had remembered. And we started looking and looking in places, including people's backyards at that point, and we found that, yes, there were more ticks in places that we hadn't seen them before. This was several years ago, and it's continued to just get more and more abundant, especially these adult black-legged ticks that are fairly easy to see compared to the nymphal stage and the larval stage ticks that have been out during the summer and you can't see them as well. So more ticks in more places, that seems like a bad thing. And it seems to be occurring across the nation. And the cases of Lyme disease are going up. And one of the more disturbing factors is shown here, that in a survey that was done back in 2016, it showed that 21% of U.S. households reported encountering at least one tick during the past year. And that is amazing to me. And it's no wonder then that the estimated number of Lyme disease cases is well over 300,000 a year now, with people encountering so many ticks. I think that's a problem. Anytime there's that kind of sickness and health concerns, just like we are in our COVID pandemic now, ticks and tick-borne diseases is a huge, huge health problem and a drain on our health resources for sure. And maybe some of you on the webinar tonight have suffered from a tick-borne disease as well. This unfortunately has come along at the time when people have more access to information than ever before, but unfortunately, much of the information that is available to people is relatively low quality tick information. We've done studies here at the university to sort of look at what people know about ticks and where do they get their information. And believe it or not, social media is one of the high areas, and that suggests that you're only getting information from people that also don't really know something or know exactly all about it. And so it has led to a nation that has tick literacy deficit, I believe. And when we do survey work to find out just how accurate people's tick knowledge is, we find that it's somewhat lacking. It has led me to come up with this idea that everyone seems to know something about ticks, that's for sure. But oftentimes it's just wrong enough. Maybe not completely wrong, but not completely right either. I think that would brand it as potentially misinformation to some degree. But the issue with being just wrong enough in the case of ticks is that you have perhaps a false sense of security because what you think you know, like tick season's over, for instance, but it's not really, puts you at increased tick risk. So we tried to address that issue of tick literacy deficit through our TickEncounter website and some of the other offerings, including this webinar. I don't know how many of you have ever gone on to tickencounter.org, but I'd encourage you to use some of the tools, and we'll look at some of the tools tonight so that you'll become a little familiar. When you hit the page, you'll know what you're looking for. But I will point out that most of your navigation is along this red bar right here. So this red bar is quite important to you, and you can click on some of the things there. We also have some of the things that are most frequently looked at down here, and you can read a little bit about it and see if that interests you or if it's something that you need as well. We're going to talk tonight about the 5 top tick smart actions that you can take going into the fall to protect your family against adult stage black-legged ticks. Now, these 5 actions don't change very much, but there's little things that are different depending on what ticks you're trying to protect yourself from. And so we're going to focus in on how to protect ourselves this fall using these 5 actions. Now, I could have 20 actions, but what we've learned is that we can't even get people to do more than 1 or 2 things, and even there, they may not be doing it that effectively or efficiently. So why give you 20 if we can focus in on 5? And so that's been our strategy here. So knowing the kinds of ticks that are active throughout the year where you live is really important, because you may not even be living in a place where there are black-legged ticks, and you'll find out that that's important to know that as well. We want people to perform daily tick checks, especially checking below the belt when it's tiny nymph season. That was in the summer. It turns out that in the fall, you need to check above the belt because the ticks often will climb a little bit higher. We're going to tell you about turning your clothes into tick repellent clothes. We're going to give you a little bit of information about products that do and don't work to treat your yard. And we're going to talk just briefly about protecting your pets as well from ticks. We're going to spend a lot of time on this, knowing the ticks, because that's sort of the foundational place to start. So knowing the kinds of ticks that are active where you live. We've done a lot of work in this regard, and you'll see why this is very important. So we'll jump right into it. So why is it important to identify ticks correctly? Aren't they all just bloodsuckers, and don't they all transmit germs? Well, it turns out that different ticks transmit different diseases, and if you know what type of tick that you've encountered, then you have a better idea of the germs that might have transmitted to you. Let's just review that. So when we think about these black-legged ticks, they can transmit the germs that cause Lyme disease, human babesiosis, human anaplasmosis, something that we're still fishing for a name, but we're now calling it hard tick relapsing fever, and of course, Powassan encephalitis virus. When you switch to American dog ticks, you have to erase the board, so to speak, because they have their own germs. In fact, they don't transmit any of those germs that black-legged ticks do, but they have their own germs. They're the transmitters of the germ that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and also a bunch of lesser pathogenic spotted fever group bacteria that don't usually cause people to become sick, but can fool you because they can make your test positive for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They also transmit a bacteria called tularemia. And then when we get to talking about Lone Star ticks, which are starting to invade Rhode Island and the northeastern United States, they've been far more common in the southeastern United States up until about a decade ago. You have to erase the board again because they also have their own set of germs. They cause human ehrlichiosis. They have a germ that's called Borrelia lone stari, which is not a Lyme disease Borrelia, but it's another type of Borrelia, and it doesn't really, we don't know that it causes any disease, but it's certainly present in the ticks, and so that can mess people up if they have their tick tested and you get the answer back that it's Borrelia species positive. Borrelia species, there's a lot of species of Borrelia, but the Borrelia burgdorferi is the germ that causes Lyme disease. So you can't get a test back positive saying Borrelia species. It might be Lone Stari if it's a Lone Star tick, and it had a little bit of Lyme disease. It's not a Lyme disease bacteria. One thing that might be of some interest for veterinarians is the cytoxoon. It's a protozoal parasite transmitted by these Lone Star ticks. It's more common in Arkansas and Oklahoma, but its main natural host are bobcats, and we're starting to see bobcats in our area, and now we have the tick vector in our area as well. So this is a highly fatal disease in cats. Not bobcats, they just carry it, but domesticated cats. And so if they get bitten by an infected Lone Star tick, they get very sick, and the fatality rate's in the 30 to 40% range. So it's something our veterinarians here probably need to be a little bit aware of and be paying attention to as we see more bobcats in in our northeastern United States. So the old regime was you got a tick, you picked it off, you flushed it down the toilet. Some people smashed it with a hammer or lit it on fire or something like that. But we don't think that's the best thing to do anymore. Now that we realize that there are different ticks that carry different germs, it's really important to correctly identify the tick first so that you have a sense of what you might get. Or it could be that if it's a tick that doesn't carry Lyme disease germ, you don't have to worry about Lyme disease at least. So it's important to remove it, take a picture of it, and we're going to talk about our Tick Spotters program where you can get help if we're going to talk about identifying ticks for a few minutes, but if you still don't feel comfortable or you just want confirmation, we have a solution for you there too with our Tick Spotters program. Tick Spotters is our fast and free portal to a tick expert. So most people like to know that it's fast. We usually get back to people within 24 hours. In fact, for the last year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half, we haven't missed getting back to people in 24 hours. So I'm very proud of our efforts there. A lot of people like the fact that it's free. We accept donations, however, I'll just mention that. And it's a portal to a tick expert. So that, in a more ticks in more places world, don't you think that one thing that you really need access to, easy access to, is a tick expert? And so that's what Tick Spotters is designed to do. There's a form you have to fill out. It gives us important information, not just about you, but it helps us kind of figure out what type of tick it might be, because sometimes ticks look a little similar. It's hard to tell the difference between a Western black-legged tick and one that's found on the East Coast, for instance. But it's really important because they have different levels of carrying germs. So I'd like to start talking about this identification thing by looking at sort of what I would say is potentially one of the roots of some of the misinformation and how it all is generated. So here's a grandmother who found this tick on her little granddaughter's ear, behind the ear. Can you see what kind of tick it is? Do you know? Here, you can get a closer look at it. Well, she put it out to her Facebook friends, and I can't script stuff like this. This is just really pretty amazing. So this lady says you can take it to the pediatrician or the ER. I don't know one emergency room doc or pediatrician that actually wants to see your tick because they really don't know what it is either. This person is very bold. She says this tick is not a deer tick. Maybe you agree with that. But if the redness doesn't spread, she should be okay. That's the kind of information that you're getting from trusted friends, and it may not be all that right. This one says it's too big to be a deer tick because she's heard that deer ticks are tiny. But she hates ticks, so I don't really know if we can believe her anyway. And this one is one of my favorites. She says, deer ticks are almost microscopic. This looks like an ordinary tick to me. If anyone listening tonight knows the genus and species of something called the ordinary tick, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that. Anyway, by the time we saw this and got involved, we realized that all of the information that poor Liz had gotten was just wrong enough to still leave her at risk. If it was not a deer tick and she knew that only deer ticks transmitted the Lyme disease germ, she would be relieved. But we told her that it was actually a female black-legged tick or a deer tick, and that it had been attached for about 2.5 days, making it a fairly risky tick. And so we went on to tell her that about 50% of these ticks are infected in the area that she resides in. And so this represents a fairly risky tick bite right there. But just looking at other Tick Spotters submissions, we can get a sense of this just wrong enough phenomenon. So here's a person that sent this tick in, and they guessed that it was embedded for about 12 hours. Really? 12 hours? It's been attached for about 3 or 3.5 days. So just wrong enough again, thinking that it couldn't be too risky if it was just attached for 12 hours, but it's actually been attached for longer. Here's one where they took it to the doctor, and the doctor said that they were not deer ticks. Very emphatically, they were not deer ticks. Well, it turns out these are black-legged ticks. This one's been attached for probably about a day and a half, or maybe going on to 2 days. Again, just wrong enough. Here's one. This one was sent to an actual testing laboratory. I blanked out the information about that, but they wrote back saying that it was a female Lone Star tick. Well, here's pictures of a male and a female Lone Star tick. Which one do you think it is? And so here's another thing. You see, here's Rickettsia species. So this person would get this back and think that this was a female Lone Star tick and that they had Rocky Mountain spotted fever because it tested positive for that. But like I said, this Rickettsia amblyomyi is a commensal organism in this tick that doesn't seem to cause disease at all. And because this is sort of a non-specific probe that they used, it came up positive as well. So they're in the spotted fever group Rickettsia, but they don't cause disease. And so, yes, they may be positive for that. It would be unusual if they weren't positive for the commensal organism that lives inside of them. But it's not something that causes disease. So you have to be alert and aware of these types of things, even with what you think are tick experts. So this was another just wrong enough situation. This one, you know, is a very typical, has been a very typical type of picture over the summer. This one came from Georgia. Maybe you think you know what this kind of tick is. They didn't really know that it's a very common, but it was on their young child. For approximately 20 hours, they thought, well, this has been attached for 3 to 4 days, I can tell you. And but she's been panicking all day. This is the kind of message that we often get. Tick bites like this cause a lot of panic, anxiety, fear, concern, and rightly so, because some ticks are very dangerous in this situation. But you need a tick expert to help you, because this is another one of those just wrong enough situations. So maybe now you get the sense of where I came up with this. Everyone knows something about ticks, but maybe what they know is often just wrong enough to still leave them at some risk. Well, so this is what the type of response that we would give someone. So this is the one that went to that person with the 3 to 4 day attached nymph Lone Star tick. So we confirm the identification, we tell how long it's been attached, and then there's a lot of public health information that is tailored to the particular tick and the geographic region where the person who encountered the tick is from. And all of this is sent back within 24 hours usually. So you might have a question, well, how is it that we knew how long it was attached? So we have a tool on TickEncounter, and this is what it looks like, and you can find it under the red tab where it says tick identification and tick growth comparison. And then we have a whole bunch of different types of ticks, and you can see a series of ticks attached and feeding for different lengths of time. So we use this tool to help us gauge how long the ticks might have been attached and feeding. You can see how this unfed black-legged tick changes its appearance, so it doesn't look like a black-legged tick at all by the time it's 3 or 4 days feeding. So I'm going to share with you now in a few minutes my secret for correct tick identification. This is what most people see when they see a tick, especially a larger one that's partially engorged. They see the whole gross tick. But what most inspirational speakers will tell you is, I want to broaden your vision, but tick biologists want you to narrow your vision. We want to narrow your vision to this feature right here, and we're going to talk about this. Its name is a scutum. Some people call it a shield, but the scutum is the piece that's going to be very diagnostic, especially with adult ticks. So there's two things I'll mention right now. If you send a picture of a tick and it's upside down, because you don't know the top from the bottom of the tick, then a tick expert's going to have trouble identifying it because they need to see this scutum. So always turn the tick right side up, please, if you're going to send tick spotters a picture. So this is a lone star tick. You can see the single white pigment spot right there. And so we have this tool also on the tick identification tab, and it's a tick ID guide. So you can see here are the 4 most commonly occurring adult stage ticks in the United States: a black-legged tick, lone star tick, an American dog tick, and a brown dog tick. And you can see the scutums look different for all of them. When you highlight it like this, if you knew to look what to look for, you could probably be able to identify the ticks yourself. So this pigment spot is at the back side of the scutum in lone star ticks. The pigment is kind of diffuse on the scutum for American dog ticks, and these two don't have any pigment at all. But this one is different from this in that you see there's tiny little things called eye spots. They're not really eyes, they are spots. They look like eye spots on the margin of the brown dog tick, but the black-legged tick doesn't have that. Also notice the mouth parts, if they're still intact, are quite different. These have triangular shaped mouth parts and they're very short. And these have straight mouth parts and they're very long. So you can see some have longer mouth parts, some have shorter mouth parts, but the scutum pigmentation or lack of pigmentation is very, very helpful in identifying the ticks, even if they're full of blood like all of these ticks are. So let's just look at this a little bit further. So this is the scutum of a black-legged tick, the female. And here's the scutum on a male. So the scutum on a male covers the entire body. Scutum on the female covers the first third. Maybe you're wondering why that is. Well, it turns out the female can't be covered by an entire shield because she needs to suck on blood and engorge so that she can reproduce, lay eggs. But the male doesn't have to feed at all, and so it's able to be covered its entire body by a shield that helps protect it. So this actually is a little bit harder than this material back here, the scutum. And so if it's on a host that has sharp claws or something like that, this helps protect it from being abraded and then leaking all of its internal body moisture out. So the shields are a good thing. So here's the American dog tick with the white pigment diffuse on the scutum. And this is what it looks like if it covers the entire tick body on the male. All that white pigment just sort of spreads out and it looks like this pattern here. So you can see that if you just know to look at the scutum and the pigmentation patterns, you can tell both the types of ticks, black-legged ticks from American dog ticks from lone star ticks, but you can also tell the difference between females and males. And it's true that black-legged tick males don't transmit the Lyme disease germ, but male American dog ticks do feed long enough. They're different than these males in that they need to feed for brief periods of time in order to stimulate their sperm, whereas these is already stimulated. And so they will feed, and in that feeding, they can transmit the Rocky Mountain spotted fever germ. So as the tick feeds, you can see the scutum never changes. The scutum stays the same whether the tick is unfed or whether the tick is 3.5 days fed. And so that makes the scutum really invaluable as a part of the tick that is always the same. Hopefully you can appreciate now why I don't really want to see an upside down tick, because I rely heavily on looking at the scutum when we look at ticks. Now, I mentioned in our response that we give some public health information. So with this lone star tick, we talk about the germs that they can carry and what proportion of the ticks might be carrying the germs where the person encountered the tick. But this tick, many of you may have become fearful of as it's moved into the New England area, because it's been attributed to causing a red meat allergy. And so we have information about the red meat allergy under one of those tabs on TickEncounter. But just because you're bitten by a Lone Star tick does not mean that you're going to become allergic to red meat. Let me just assure you that the vast majority of people who are bitten by Lone Star ticks actually never develop a red meat allergy, just as most of the people don't have peanut allergies either. So allergies are kind of dependent on the person's immunological background and their genetics. But just because you're bitten by a Lone Star tick, it doesn't mean you're going to become allergic to red meat. It's something good to know that it might happen, especially if you start to get weird symptoms 5 to 6 hours after you've eaten red meat and consistently every time for a few weeks or something. That might, and you know you've been bitten by a Lone Star tick, then you might want to see your doctor about that. So I just want to stop there for a second and emphasize that tick spotters is really the newest and best way to manage tick bites because you get a confirmation, it's fast, it's free, and you get your best next actions that you could be taken given to you all by looking at your computer email. So some of the other benefits of this Tick Spotters program, it's a national program. It's allowing us to track tick trends across the nation. And here's the map that you would see about black-legged tick distribution on the CDC website. And it would suggest that it's always that way. But because we know that different types of ticks and different stages of ticks occurred in different places at different times of the year, it's not really a static map. So here's a winter view of ticks across America, and these are the hot spots. Here's a spring view. You can see that it's a little bit different. Here's a summer view. It's a little bit similar to the spring view. But mostly I want to focus on the fall. Here's the fall, and you can see that it becomes more quiet in certain parts of the United States regarding ticks, but in the northeastern United States and the middle Atlantic states as well, that's when tick activity hits a peak. And 80% of the ticks that people encounter during the fall are going to be some form of black-legged ticks, whether it's the Ixodes scapularis that live throughout this range or the western black-legged tick, Ixodes pacificus, that lives out in this area. So it actually makes identifying ticks in the fall a lot easier because pretty much it's always going to be a black-legged tick, and it would be an odd tick that isn't a black-legged tick. So Tick Spotters data, it's crowdsourced. So people find ticks, they send pictures in, and so better than tick scientists going out and trying to find ticks all across America, people are finding ticks and sharing them with tick scientists. And so here's the map from the CDC of the distribution of Lone Star ticks. The Tick Spotters have shown that these Lone Star ticks have also started to migrate into Wisconsin and Michigan as well, places that aren't on the CDC's map. So people could be encountering these ticks in these places. Yet, if they looked at the CDC data, I love the CDC folks, but their maps are just a little bit out of date. Tick Spotters data across America can show the tickiest states, at least by submissions. And you can see these are the 5 tickiest states. In our area, Massachusetts and New York are right up there. Pennsylvania is pretty high as well, and Virginia. California is, of course, they have the most people, so they might have the most people encountering ticks as well. You can find the tickiest zip codes. So maybe you know people or you live in one of these zip codes. So these are where most submissions come from in those states. And we use it to feed a tool that you can find on TickEncounter. It's under probably tick identification again. And so all of these blue tabs, you can click on whichever area you live, and you can see for the 2-week period, the current 2-week period, you can see which ticks are active and which ticks aren't. Let's say you plan to take a vacation on a different time period, you can click these little red arrows and go to the area where you're going to vacation and find out which ticks you might likely encounter as well. And so right now we're at this stage, well, actually in another 2 weeks, we'll be at this stage of being medium risk. And soon after that, it'll turn into high risk, because that's when these adult stage black-legged ticks become like a ticknado. That's why I showed you the video. We also use tick spotters pictures to help educate people. So if you have never looked at this before and you want to see what's happening in your area, you can see that we geographically reference and timestamp these pictures. We add, sometimes this is what the people say, sometimes it's something that we think will help people better know what's going on, but you can see people's real live experiences with ticks. These are not made up. These are all actual pictures that tick spotters send in for us. And all of these pictures, just want you to appreciate, are ticks that have been attached for a long period of time. In this case, it's a black-legged tick. You see there's no pigment on the scutum. And this has been attached probably for greater than 5 days. 50% of them are infected, so that's a risky tick. So it's good to know, right? Good to know places to look, good to know, just be reminded that we should be doing a tick check. And this is a good one. I'll segue into this. So is this even a tick? This person thought it was a larval tick, but some of you probably recognize that as being a bed bug. So it turns out that almost 5% of things that people think are ticks, that they've encountered as ticks, actually aren't ticks at all. So they're all worried about whatever it is that they have giving them Lyme disease. This one is curious. I'll point it out. It's a spider beetle. It's very common in people's bathrooms and linen closets, it turns out. Doesn't transmit Lyme disease. It's not a tick at all, but it's far more common than I expected. I've not really ever seen that. This one's kind of weird looking. Maybe you've seen one of these things. They're called pseudoscorpions. If that was a tick, that would be a honkin' tick, right? But this is probably an example of the most common tick lookalike, is what we call them, as a weevil. The thing about weevils is they fall out of trees onto your head, and so I wonder if that's where people have the notion that ticks fall out of trees onto your head. They think it's that because this weevil looks a little bit like a tick. Because in all of my years of doing tick, I have never experienced a tick falling onto my head out of a tree. So that's just another one of those being just wrong enough pieces of information. So we're going to move on here and move on to one of the other tick smart activities that I'd like to have people to be familiar with, at least performing daily tick checks. You can check below the belt during nymph season. That is just passing us right now. So May and June and July is nymphal black-legged tick season. They crawl up from the ground, up your leg, and get stuck usually by your waist. So they're going to be in the lower extremities. But now the adult stage ticks actually wait for hosts somewhere in the neighborhood of your knee. And so they're more likely to get above your waist on the outsides of your clothes and get up underneath your shirt. And so you want to check higher up during the fall. Still probably wouldn't hurt to look lower down as well, but you want to spend more time just, checking in the mirror above the belt. So we have this campaign of leaning over and looking because sometimes, especially with the nymphal stage ticks, they're hard to see when you're not leaning over and looking. And some people like me are finding it harder and harder to lean over and look. So there's tricks like this trick. I happened to be doing my business one day and I realized that I could see more than I expected, including ticks that might have been on the insides and outsides of my legs and even on the back sides of my legs and up into my groin as well. So this could be a really handy thing for you to do tick checks if you're regular. you'll check once a day while you're sitting on the toilet. You just have to remember to do that. If you find a tick, there's many ways that people still use to remove ticks. There's all kinds of little tools. This is very common. People have tweezers that look like this, but it's never been a good idea to squeeze something that's potentially filled with germs, especially if it's attached to your skin with a straw, because all the hydraulics are moving in this direction. So having a pointy tweezer, like one made by TickEase or ProTickMe, that grabs a tick, even one as small as a poppy seed like this nymph, and closer to the body so that the hydraulics of the germs is going back this way and not into your skin this way. So having a pointy tweezer is really a very useful thing. Lighting the tick on the back end with a hot object or something is only going to make it sort of regurgitate things out this way. So that's never been a good idea. Plus, too many people have been burned in the past to make that a good thing. So what about your clothing and repelling ticks when you're out and about recreating? We think the most effective strategy is to turn your clothes into tick repellent clothes. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. First, I'd like you to get used to the concept by thinking about protecting your shoes. Shoes, most people don't mind spraying stuff like waterproofing on their shoes, but they might not want to put that right on all of their clothes. So just think of products like this Sawyer insect spray, insect repellent spray, or Ben's is another great product with permethrin. The active ingredient needs to be permethrin, but you can spray your shoes during the times of the year that the immature stages, the larvae and the nymphs, are active. So May, June, July, and August. It would work really well because the shoes are going to be the most likely first place that these ticks attach. And if you've sprayed your shoes, they will fall off. And if you use the permethrin, they'll actually die. So that's a good way to protect yourself from larvae and nymphs. But like I said, in the fall, most of the adult ticks are questing. They want to get on a deer. And so if they were questing down in the leaf litter, all they'd see of that deer are 4 little toothpicks walking through the leaf litter. They have a better shot of getting onto the host that they want to get onto to suck blood by climbing up the vegetation just a little bit. And so that's what they do. So the shoe sprays are less important in the fall, but it's still a good idea to do that because what does it hurt? But wearing tick repellent clothing, especially tick repellent pants, where you're going to be, the ticks are going to be brushing up against your pants and then climbing up from there. Wearing tick repellent clothing is really the most effective strategy. We've just finished a study that showed with outdoor workers, when we looked at, we wanted them to wear tick repellent clothing while they were at work. We couldn't control what they wore when they weren't at work. We had 65% lower returns of reports of tick attachments to people that were wearing tick repellent clothes compared to people that weren't. So that's pretty good. And the more vigilant you are with wearing your tick repellent clothes, the more protection you can expect to get. So even if you're going out for a walk, you don't want to wear your tick repellent clothes while you're inside, but just have some tick repellent sweatpants that you can slip on right by the door, maybe some tick repellent socks and shoes as well to wear when you're walking your dog. These are all really good tick smart things to think about having available if you want to protect yourself from ticks at any time of the year. If you've come back in from recreating and you haven't been using tick repellent clothes, you may be carrying ticks inside with you on your clothes, and if you just throw them in the laundry hamper, the person doing the laundry may be the next person to encounter one of those ticks. We just had a case of that with a paintballer today, sorting out that ticks were probably in his clothes, and they got on him when he went to get his clothes to go play paintball again. So running it through a hot dryer, black-legged ticks are generally killed within 5 minutes if the dryer is hot. Lone Star ticks and American dog ticks just a little bit longer, maybe 10 minutes to be on the safe side. People say, well, I don't want to dry dirty clothes, and that may be true. Then you can wash them first and then dry them. Just be aware to check yourself for ticks if you're washing clothes that have been on someone that was outside in tick habitat. And this time of year, in the fall, because the adult stage ticks are questing about this height, it doesn't take long for them to crawl up underneath of an untucked shirt. So one of the most easiest things that you can do, even though you might not like the restriction or the look, just tuck in your shirt during October and November to help keep ticks from crawling up the insides of your shirt and attaching to your skin underneath there. So we're going to talk just for a second about treating your yard with tick-killing insecticides. This is sort of what is the best application for black-legged ticks. So black-legged ticks are going to be very unlikely to be in habitat out even this far, even into a shady lawn. But they're going to be higher concentrations along this, what we call the ecotone, between the transition between the lawn and the woods, and then on into the woods. And so this is what's called a perimeter spray, and we spray it at the edge of the yard and as far into the woods as the spray will go. And that's very effective at reducing the number of black-legged ticks, depending on what product that you use. So we did a study several years ago, it actually took a few years, where we tested the industry standard, which is one called bifenthrin, or Talstar is the trade name. And we compared that with a bunch of natural products. So these days, people want to spray something that they think is safer, even though if it's going to kill ticks, it's going to kill other things too, very likely. But if it's branded as a natural tick killer, people think it's safe for everything else, but it's not really. But you can see that most of the natural products that were tested didn't have very good control of ticks, both in the knockdown, and then certainly there was no residual impact, whereas the Talstar had 100% control in our studies. So I'm just saying you get what you are paying for, although some of these products actually cost more than the Talstar does as well. So just be aware if you're going to spray some of these natural products that you may not be getting the type of tick control that will be effective for you. This is another product. It's a host-targeted product called Tick Tubes. This one's called Tick Control Tubes. It's permethrin-treated nesting material that mice, which are the main source of infecting ticks. Other animals can infect ticks with the Lyme disease germ as well, but it's the immature stages of ticks that feed on these mice that end up becoming infected mostly and making the infected ticks that could occur even in your yard. So this treats them, and it does a pretty effective job. And in this case, you probably want to combine it with a spray as well. We did a study last year in people's yards that had used sprays, and we just trapped white-footed mice, and we found that many of the mice still had a small number of ticks, even though the yard was sprayed, because the mice go further than where the spray comes, but they could be dropping the ticks off in your yard. And as long as you continue to spray, you probably will do a good job killing those ticks and protecting yourselves, but adding this targeted treatment to the control mix is a good idea. Now, protecting your pet. We find that there's a lot of great products out there, and they most all kill ticks pretty effectively, maybe not the natural products so much, but you have to just be aware that some ticks are only killed once the tick attaches to the dog, but other times dogs can be carrying ticks loose into your home as well. So we have resources that talk about what these various products do, and maybe you can check out your product, or if you are interested in other products, you can get more information from this part of the website as well. It's under protection. So I'm going to pretty much wrap up now with just some fall tick smart tips. Tucking in your shirt, something to remember. Wearing tick repellent pants is a great idea. Always being prepared with a pointy tweezer and maybe something to put that tick in, like a little Ziploc bag. That will hold it until you have a chance to take a picture and maybe send it in to tick spotters. I would ask, if you're going to do that, it'd be nice if you would take the tick out of the bag for the picture, because the bag oftentimes will give a reflection or impede our ability to see it. Maybe it is why many people send us pictures of ticks that are upside down, because they can't even see the right side up from the wrong side up while the tick is in the bag. So just remember, if you can't really see it, then I probably can't see it on the other end of the internet looking at your picture either. One last thing I'll share, and that is, if you walk in the center of paths while you're out in the fall, you'll avoid most of the adult stage ticks, because they really are along the edges about the height that they will brush up against something because they want to get on a deer. So with that, maybe there are questions. I'll turn it back to Vanessa, because she's looking at the questions, and maybe she can ask some of your questions if there's still time. Looks like there's a little bit of time.
Awesome. Thank you. I learned a lot, and I have those great tweezers myself, so adopted some of these techniques. So if you have any questions, you can move your mouse around and enter them either into the Q&A or the chat box. I think you've answered a lot of the questions. In terms of like product recommendations, where on the website should folks look?
Well, let's see. I think with the pet protection products, that chart is found under protection, and then the drop down is pets, person, or yard. And so that information is there. The yard protection data that I showed is not really available on the website just yet, but soon it will be, because the work was just published. So,
could you speak a little bit more about tick repellent clothes?
So there are a few different places that provide treatment of clothes commercially. One's called Insect Shield, and they're located in Greensboro, North Carolina, and you can actually send them your own clothes. So let's say you have lucky golf pants, but you are not such a good golfer, and you chase your balls into the side of the golf course maybe a little bit too often. In the fall, in particular, those adult ticks are going to be there, and so you should be wearing treated lucky golf pants. And so you can send those lucky golf pants to Insect Shield. In about a week's time, they'll send them right back to you, treated, and they'll be just like treated clothes that you can purchase from retailers, including Insect Shield, but there are other retailers that, like Ex Officio and stuff. Sometimes people think those clothes are a little bit expensive, so having your own clothes treated to that is actually more cost effective.
Great. Could you explain again how a tick can give us RMSF antibodies, yet we really don't have RMSF?
Well, so we actually do. It's very low here in the northeastern United States. It's a little more common in the mid-Atlantic states, and out in ticks on the West Coast as well. So they carry non-pathogenic Rickettsia species that they will transmit to you, but it doesn't cause disease. So they're germs, but they don't cause disease, but they stimulate your immune system all the same. And then the tests are looking for the ones that cause disease, but they pick up the antibodies for these other germs as well, even though they're not causing disease. But because they're they didn't distinguish whether it was the less pathogenic ones or just a spotted fever group, Rickettsia, it comes out misidentified basically for you. You'd have to look at symptoms. If you're not sick, but you test positive, that does not mean that you have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I suppose it means that maybe if you had fever for a few days, you were lucky and had a had a light case or something, but you also might have been exposed to one of these non-pathogenic spotted fever rickettsias.
So another question on prevention. Someone's asking if putting a 3-foot border with mulch around the perimeter of their yard might help.
Yeah, so what that does is it sets apart the more risky zone of your yard where that wood starts from the yard part. And so it's a good way of training your children in particular, even reminding yourself that you've just moved from the more safety of your yard into the more dangerous part of your yard. In terms of it being a barrier to ticks, if you target your spray on there, it will be more of a barrier. But these ticks really don't walk very far. It's really you that walks into their habitat, not so much them walking into your habitat.
Around those same lines, if a tick cannot find a host, what's a typical lifespan of a tick? And they didn't mention which type.
So if we just focus on black-legged ticks, we're going into the adult stage tick season. Those adult stage ticks actually came from the nymphal stage ticks, the middle stage, that was feeding on things like mice and chipmunks and birds and other animals this summer. They were active. The nymphs were active starting in May, June, and July. They now have taken the blood meal that they got and transformed themselves into the adult stage ticks that are going to be active in October. Those adult stage ticks in October are going to get a blood meal from a deer or a dog or some larger animal, mostly deer, and they're going to drop off. We can actually find deer bedding areas and sort through the leaves and find engorged ticks. And that's how the life cycle then starts, because those engorged adult ticks will sit there and cook the blood meal into eggs, and there'll be 1,500 to 3,000 eggs that they will lay all in one little spot. And it actually, if you think about it, if 6 or 7 of these ticks came off of a deer on any given day, that means 6 or 7 times 2,000 or so little larval ticks all in the space of where one deer was laying. And that's pretty amazing. There's no, that poor unsuspecting mouse that runs through that little bit of woods is going to get covered with these little larval ticks. And in fact, it's not unusual in August, when the larvae are active, to find mice infested with hundreds of these little larval ticks taking a blood meal. And most of the mice in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states are infected with the germs causing Lyme disease, babesiosis, anaplasmosis, and Powassan virus. And so they can pass that on as the larval stage ticks feeding in August and into September are feeding on these rodents. So that sets up the life cycle. But the adult stage ticks that are active in the fall will make it through the winter. They're quiet usually when it's too cold. They can't move their little muscles. But when March comes along, they're the first ticks out in the Northeast and the upper Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic states. And they're the ones in the springtime are just the leftovers from the fall. And by the beginning of June, they'll all be dead. So if you think about it, they live from October and active in October and November. They're surviving through the winter. They're active in March, April, and May, and then they run out of steam and die, only to be replaced in the landscape by these nymphal stage ticks, which came because of the larvae. The larvae, I know this is getting confusing, the larvae were feeding in August and September. They pass through the winter and become the nymphs the following spring. So they all last about, 6 months in nature. In the laboratory, we can keep them a little bit longer.
Wonderful. I don't know if TickEncounter, I guess we had a few questions. Does it include a listing, or where would you find like a good listing of maybe healthcare professionals who work with tick-borne illness?
Yeah, we don't, we focus on prevention and not treatment and diagnosis. So we don't really get into that arena, sorry.
Okay, just thought we'd address it. Another question, I'm concerned that using a spray will kill or injure other animals. Did you say there was a spray that won't affect other, beneficial animals or insects?
Yeah, so if it's going to kill ticks, it's likely to kill whatever it hits. It's more about how it's applied. And so when it's applied in the perimeter zone for black-legged ticks, you're applying such a small amount that it really isn't too detrimental. We have tick smart applicators, so we do some training with applicators, and they're taught not to spray flowering plants. They're taught not to spray over bodies of water. And so in that regard, we can try and limit the collateral damage that any insecticide is likely to do by trying not to target things that beneficial insects like pollinators might encounter. So pollinators are looking for flowers. If you don't spray flowers, then they're not going to be hit with the insecticide.
Wonderful. Well, if you want to advance the slides, we can close up. Thank you very much for sharing all this great information and answering so many of our questions. We just wanted to mention that the Master Gardener course, I coordinate the Master Gardener program. If you're interested in learning more good research-based science and sharing that information as it relates to gardening and the environment with your community, we encourage you to apply in our online application process, and our applications are due November 1st. Again, if you'd like to come to our next Learn at Home webinar series, we're going to be hosting a different topic and speaker every Tuesday night. We've changed to Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. You can find the recording of this class and previous classes on our Cooperative Extension, University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension YouTube page. So here are another grouping of resources, and we thank everyone for being a part of tonight's webinar. Thank you so much, Dr. Mather.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone that stayed with us and listened and asked great questions. So hopefully you'll be safe this fall. But if you do get a tick, we encourage you to send it to Tick Spotters.